Hi, my name is Walter Sinnott-Armstrong. I teach at Duke University in the Philosophy Department and the Kenan Institute for Ethics. In this video, I want to introduce you to a new approach to an old issue, the issue of knowledge. You can see the basic problem in any murder mystery. You believe that the butler killed his boss, but do you know that the butler did it? In order to know that the butler did it, you need to know that no other suspect did it without the butler. You need to know that it was not the cook or the driver or the spouse or anyone else. Is that enough to know that the butler killed his boss? Not yet. You also need to know that his boss really is dead. Maybe he's just faking in order to avoid taxes. And you need to know that he was murdered. Maybe he died from a heart attack. Unless you can rule out every other possibility, you do not know that the butler killed his boss. The problem is that there are always possibilities that you cannot rule out. Maybe the boss had an unknown identical twin who is the one who was killed. Maybe the boss is in a deep coma that looks exactly like death, but he will wake up in his coffin. Maybe a magician created an illusion to make everyone think that the boss died when he's really on a beach somewhere enjoying the sun. If you have to rule out all of the other suspects in order to know that the butler killed his boss, then it seems that you also have to rule out all of these other possibilities for exactly the same reason. But you cannot rule out all of the other possibilities. So, how can you really know anything? This line of argument should trouble you. I hope that you do not want to send people to prison when you do not know that they committed a crime. I also imagine that you think you know a lot of things. That you know your own name, your own gender, where you parked your car, how much you should get paid at your job, and so on and so on. If this skeptical argument is right, then you do not know any of these things that you think you know. Indeed, you know nothing, or almost nothing. Almost everyone wants to avoid that conclusion. The question is how to avoid it. Some philosophers claim to know that the butler did it without being able to rule out any other suspects, except by saying that they didn't do it because the butler did it. But that blatantly begs the question. Other philosophers claim to know that the butler did it even if they cannot rule out a twin or a magician, because those are just too far-fetched. But then they owe us some account of which possibilities are too far-fetched. That is, they need to tell us which possibilities need to be ruled out and which ones don't. That is very hard to specify. So, none of these solutions seems adequate. A more satisfying solution comes from contrastivism. Standard accounts of knowledge assume that knowledge is a two-place relation between a person and a proposition that holds when the person knows the proposition. Formally, S knows that P. Contrastivists deny that knowledge is this simple. They say instead that knowledge is a three-place relation. The third place is a contrasting proposition. Formally, S knows that P in contrast with Q. This account allows us to draw finer distinctions and thus to escape the problem. Suppose that the butler did kill his boss, and I can rule out the other suspects, but I cannot rule out the possibilities of a twin or a magician. Then contrastivists can say, 1, I know that the butler killed his boss in contrast with the alternative that the cook did it or the driver did it or one of the other suspects did it. But still, they can also say, 2, I do not know that the butler killed his boss in contrast with the alternative that he killed his boss's identical twin or that a magician faked the whole thing in ways that nobody can detect. Skeptics argue that there are always some possibilities that we cannot rule out. Then they conclude that nobody knows anything. You could just agree, or you could simply dismiss skeptics as silly. But both of these positions seems crude and simplistic. Contrastivism enables us to be more subtle. Contrastivists can reply that such skepticism has some insight and some error. It is correct insofar as nobody can know anything in contrast with all possibilities, because there's always some possibility that they can't rule out. But it's still misleading because we can know a lot in contrast with normal possibilities, namely the ones that we can check and that are worth taking seriously. Some philosophers hate this compromise. They want more. They want to be able to rule out every contrary possibility. Good luck. Just tell us how. Contrastivists think it's better to admit that you cannot have that much knowledge. We need to learn to be satisfied with something less, namely contrastive knowledge. For me to punish the butler, it's enough for me to know that the butler murdered his boss in contrast with other suspects and in contrast with the possibility that the boss is really just in a coma. I do not need to know that there is no magician that's fooling us all in ways that we could never detect no matter what we did. We can and we should ignore some possibilities and get on with our lives.